11 years ago, when I changed track from being in advertising to BBC Media Action, I had to turn a switch in my head. So the switch was earlier I used to serve consumers because I was in advertising and I had to sell products and services. But 11 years ago, I had to switch that to audiences. At BBC Media Action, which is BBC's independent international charity, we believe in one of the core BBC values, which is audiences are at the heart of everything we do. And that's what the previous speakers, as well as Mr. Kashyap, has said, that we really have to deliver to the needs and also sometimes to predict the needs of our audiences. So I have been for 11 years not really selling products and services, but definitely creating demand for products and services that have to do with, general improvement in health and governance and rights and, making communities more resilient. Because at BBC Media Action, what we do is to create communication solutions for social impact. So we work on health, we work on governance and rights, and we work on resilience. So I'm going to talk about some of the principles and approaches that we use in, achieving social and behavioral change outcomes, right? So in essence, in a way, we are selling ideas, right? We are creating awareness. We want to oftentimes improve attitudes or change attitudes. We have to create a sense of confidence in the audiences that we are working with, and we also have to do a lot of work, in changing social norms, and which is why it's called social and behavior change communication. And ultimately, all of this has to lead to a change in practice or behavior, right? So that's what we do. I'll try and illustrate the points that I'm making with some examples. So essentially, in 4 simple words, the approach that we take in order to bring about social and behavior change is to basically start with understanding the audience, right? Understanding the audience's needs, often, looking at a lot of research, going out and being with them to understand what is the need, what has got to change, and from there mine insights. Now, both the previous speakers have talked about insights. So, for example, if somebody doesn't want a test ride, in my case, if a woman in rural Bihar, a low literate or an illiterate woman, does not really understand how a baby is growing inside her body and thinks it's Bhagwan ki den, then I can't just go and give her a biology lesson. So then I have to come up and mine an insight from which I can produce an idea, which is the next step, right? And that idea has to be well executed, and we have to prove impact. We are a fully funded organization. So for all our donors, people who are giving us grants to work on projects, we have to demonstrate impact. So this whole journey from insight, idea, execution, impact. That brings me to my favorite bugbear in working for rural customers or audiences for a very, very long time. And I'd say there is still that feeling in the development sector, not in your marketing sectors, that the villagers, they don't understand anything, you can do anything, I mean, anything goes. So if you can take a tuk-tuk or a rickshaw from point A to B, why do you need a sort of a Maruti Ciaz? Right? So just do any old thing. And that also brings me to the second bugbear in my head, and a word that I hate with every sinew in my body is the word message, right? I have grown up, I'm a communication specialist. I work with people who are constantly creating communication. If you message, then that's a very top-down approach. And you'll see that in a lot of social and behavior change communication, everybody does very heavy messaging. But we are communicators. We have to communicate. And one of the most important words there is engagement, right? If you're constantly talking down, then you're not going to be able to engage, right? So our whole model is really the model of a stimulus, providing a stimulus and eliciting a response. And I'm going to tell you a little story. So there are two blind beggars on a lovely spring day in Hyde Park in London. Okay, both of them are asking for alms, and both of them have placards on their chests and holding a tin. One of the placards says that I am blind, please give me money. And the other blind man has a placard that says, it is spring and I'm blind. Who still is fuller? Why? Yeah, and he's connecting with you emotionally that this is this wonderful spring day, blue sky, white clouds, and this man is not being able to see any of it. So that's an emotional connect. So there you are actually not providing a rational benefit through the communication. What you're doing is you're creating an emotional benefit, and if I have to take it a little higher in the way you people do marketing or I create communication, I have to often take it up to the rung of a value, right? So from a rational to an emotional benefit, and then to create value, right? So stimulus to elicit a response. That response may be that, no, I will send my daughter to this riding school, which is teaching her to ride two-wheelers, or I will try and have a conversation with my husband about family planning, because I really don't want to have a child again before 3 years. And I have to see value in doing that, right? At BBC Media Action, we have had to encounter really formidable challenges in designing our project interventions or designing the communication solutions. I'm going to talk about two specific ones. And I heard somebody using the word media dark. In 2013, we got a grant from the Google Foundation to do a project, a 2-year project on the prevention of bonded labor. Now, bonded labor is a phrase that we think belonged to the 50s, the 40s, but bonded labor is still very, very prevalent. In fact, I just read that the government has taken great umbrage to the fact that, it's still a very, very large problem in India. And the project was going to be happening in 3 states, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and Jharkhand. And we identified 110 most vulnerable and marginalized villages. Any of you have seen this film called Newton? So imagine a village like that. Okay, those were the kind of villages that we wanted to get into, completely media dark, right? Even say 5 years ago of 2014, I think, there was nothing was reaching them. So what we did was we actually innovated. We created a platform called the Listener's Village, which meant that we developed a radio program, except that it wasn't broadcast. We tied up with 10 grassroots NGOs, so it was implementation heavy. And we went into these 110 villages for 52 weeks, every week with an episode of an audio program, right? They would sit and listen to the program, and then they would discuss it, because discussion is a very, very strong determinant of change behavior, changing attitudes, and efficacy. And there are lots of absolutely wonderful stories from that project and proven impact. If you like, I could send some links to a practice briefing. This was the name of the project. It was called Majboor Kisko Bola. And once again, to have a word on insight, when we started conceptualizing the project and started designing our theory of change, we said, what is the one insight? When people get into bondage, and sometimes bondage is intergenerational, one of the things is people think that this is my destiny. I'm helpless. I can't do anything. So the insight mining produced the word helpless. And that's how we came up with Majboor. And there's a word play in there, which is we replace the D of Mazdoor with the B of Majboor. So Majboor Kisko Bola, you challenge something. And that's where execution or the craft of communication comes in. And that's why one has to be so careful in crafting what you do. The other instance of creating communication interventions for largely media dark people was in the state of Bihar, where we had to work on a host of behaviors covering about 33 months, from when a woman becomes pregnant to when the child is was 2 years old. This was a Gates-funded project, 5-year project. It's possibly one of the world's largest communication projects. And we realized that in order to reach the low literate, illiterate young woman who's newly married and is either pregnant or a new mother, we really had no platform to reach her because the figures at that time, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, were quite abysmal, and smartphones were not ubiquitous, and at least smartphones are still not ubiquitous as far as women go, because there's a GSMA report from 2017 that shows a large gender gap. And so we used human-centered design, and we came up, and so what we found was only the frontline health worker was reaching that woman, you know. She was the only platform, as it were, walking into the courtyard and talking and counseling the women. So what we did was we created, and we knew that for 40 years, those of you who are familiar with how government works, the cadres of Ashas and Anganwadis, all they have had is flip charts, which they use for 2 weeks or maximum 1 month, then they leave them behind. They go and do their own thing. So we said that, you know, how do we actually retool the frontline health worker, retool the ASHA? So we created what we call Mobile Kunji, a nifty little deck of cards on a ring, right? And each of these cards has a code. And we created a character called Dr. Anita. And you explain, so I'm the frontline health worker. These are all color-coded depending on the themes. And I show you something, then I have the bullet points behind. I counsel you on whatever it is, say birth preparedness. You have to do this, that. And that's okay, now, Bhoji, let me play you this thing called Dr. Anita, what Dr. Anita has to say. I dial this short code, and I make her listen to Dr. Anita. So this then becomes an audiovisual toolkit. So it's an innovation. So one of the biggest things is that when you design innovations, you design for scale. And I couldn't agree more with you, Pradeep. I think that the development sector, and indeed the corporate sector, the band of marketeers for years, has suffered from pilotitis, which is a disease. Okay, and everybody thinks, oh, I'll do this with, you know, 250 frontline health workers or 400 people in this geography, and, you know, this is absolutely massively successful, and then there is no way of scaling it up. There's no way of making something sustainable. So one of the things that, and I'm sort of getting into the implementation arena a bit, but one of our ambitions and one of our you know, guiding principles has been how to design scalable solutions and how to sort of, you know, have a sustainability plan. Now, when you do something good and you prove the efficacy of it in a geography like Bihar and UP are the most difficult geographies. I've worked a lot in Africa. I've worked in other Asian countries as well. But I feel that nothing compares with Bihar and UP, and they are like very large markets. Then the government itself can come forward. So the suite of mobile services that we developed for Bihar, 2 of them have now been scaled up by the government of India. One of them is Mobile Academy, which is a training course for the frontline health worker, and the other is called Kilkari, which means a baby's gurgle, which is a service across 72 weeks that reaches the family from when a woman is in her second trimester to when the child is 1 year old. Each week, a message on IVR delivered through the voice of Dr. Anita on a time-appropriate action or thing that she needs to take. So now these 2 services are in 13 states and huge numbers. So that's scalability and sustainability. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about, just and then finish, is that, you know, we have also seen that basically, in order to engage with customers, and not just rural customers or audiences, but also urban, anywhere in the world, is the power of a good story. So when you really effectively use a story, you really engage, involve, and intrigue. The other thing is that this is something I learned way back in advertising. It's called the AHA, the Zygarnik effect, which is, you know, this Swiss, Russian doctor, psychologist called Dr. Zygarna, which is that the intrigue involve model. Don't give everything away. in your opening lines or in the first 2 or 3 seconds. There were clients who would say, oh, why is there so much white space on the layout, or you haven't said anything about the product in the first 20 seconds. That's not the point. The point is you draw your customer or your audience into whatever you're doing, and then that's the intrigue, and then involve. So a story well told has the intrigue involve sort of model. And the other thing that is that a big idea is always an idea that is extendable. So for example, say, if you say that I want to tell people that wait for 3 years before between the first and the second child, and every family planning communication has happened in India for what, 50 years now, yet we have 1.3 billion people. So the thing is that, like both of you said, the couple is not looking for health benefits actually. The rural couple has many other things to worry about. The roof has to be fixed, the next gizmo for the farm has to be bought, or for poorer people, not even the next gizmo. I have to get money to feed my children till the last day of the month. So he's not looking for health benefits of his wife, or he cannot look into the future so much. He has to look at faida. How is it benefiting? So what we came up with, that if the barrier to producing the next child is this overwhelming need from society to produce the next male child, then how are you going to balance it out, and what are you going to balance it out with? With the promise of faida. So we came up with this whole campaign of ek teen do, so between 1 and 2 teen, faide ka mantar. You have to change the paradigm, not just the language, but actually the insight paradigm has to change in order to engage, in order to make it relevant. Both of you have said that, we have to actually deliver the promise, whether it is of a brand, a product category, whether we are doing generic selling, or to change behavior and attitudes. We have to give them a promise that they can engage with, that is of value to them, that gives them new knowledge. So these are the kind of principles and approaches that we have been, using, some of it I brought in with me when I came from advertising, but there's a whole lot of new stuff that one has learned in doing social and behavior change communication. And I have a few more examples which I could cite when we open it up for discussion. Thank you.